Forget the sultry seductress draped in shimmering silk, a phantom whispering sweet nothings into the ears of powerful Roman generals as empires hung in the balance. The Cleopatra you think you know, the one immortalized in countless artworks and Hollywood epics, is largely a carefully constructed illusion, a romanticized specter conjured by centuries of poets, painters, and playwrights, often with their own agendas. The raw, unvarnished truth about the last pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII. Thea Philopater is far more dangerous, infinitely more complex, and ultimately more profoundly fascinating. Her epic story isn't a mere tragic romance spun from forbidden love. It's a brutal, unrelenting saga of power politics at the highest stakes, a testament to a genius intellect navigating a world steeped in treachery and a series of audacious political gambles that very nearly redrew the map of the ancient world. Before she ever laid eyes on Julius Caesar or Mark Antony, she was already a queen forged in the searing crucible of dynastic violence so extreme it would make the most hardened modern crime lords blanch. The glittering, sun-drenched courts of Alexandria, the jewel of the Mediterranean, hid secrets far darker and more venomous than the deepest recesses of the Nile at midnight. Cleopatra learned from a terrifyingly young age, with the cold finality of a palace execution, that the perilous path to the throne was almost invariably paved with the bones and often the freshly spilled blood of your own family. This wasn't a choice. It was the grim curriculum of survival in a world where a crown was less a symbol of divinity and more a target painted on your back. The Ptolemaic dynasty, into which Cleopatra VII was born around 69 BCE, was less a serene lineage of divinely appointed rulers and more a generations-long, blood-soaked masterclass in betrayal, incest, and murder. Founded by one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals, Ptolemy the Soter, after Alexander's empire fractured, this Greek-Macedonian family ruled Egypt for nearly 3 tumultuous centuries. Their grip on the immense wealth and strategic importance of Egypt was perpetually slick with the blood of their own kin, a horrifying testament to the corrupting nature of absolute power. Sibling marriage, a practice ostensibly designed to keep the royal bloodline pure and consolidate power within the immediate family, instead fostered a claustrophobic, paranoid environment of lethal rivalries. Brothers married sisters, uncles married nieces, and almost every member of the royal household seemed to be actively plotting the downfall or outright elimination of everyone else who might pose even a remote threat to their ambitions. Assassinations weren't whispers in dark corridors. They were often public, brutal statements. Forced exiles to remote, inhospitable corners of the kingdom were common. Full-blown civil wars, pitting sibling against sibling, parent against child, became almost a dynastic tradition. These were not shocking scandals that rocked the foundations of the state. They were, chillingly, the family business, the accepted, almost ritualized, price of rule. Cleopatra's own father, Ptolemy the Olates, derisively nicknamed the flute player for his perceived unmanly preoccupation with music and religious festivals rather than statecraft, only managed to cling precariously to his throne through a desperate combination of exorbitant bribery of influential Roman officials and a humiliating willingness to act as Rome's compliant puppet. Even then, he was briefly overthrown by his own fiercely ambitious daughter, Berenice IV, who was Cleopatra's older sister. Berenice, seizing power, reportedly had her own mother, or stepmother, sources vary, dispatched to remove a rival. When Olates, backed by Roman might, was eventually restored to his throne, Berenice IV paid the ultimate price for her rebellion, executed by her own father. This was the lethal, high-stakes atmosphere Cleopatra breathed from her earliest infancy. She witnessed firsthand, in the most visceral terms, that power wasn't simply inherited. It was seized, defended with ruthless ferocity, and often required preemptive strikes against those closest to you. Her own tortuous path to becoming sole pharaoh was no different. Upon her father's death in 51 BCE, she was named co-ruler with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, then a boy of about 10, to whom she was, according to Ptolemaic custom, married. But sharing power, especially with an intelligent and increasingly popular older sister, was never a Ptolemaic strong suit. Ambitious courtiers and powerful eunuchs, like Pothinus and Achilles, quickly manipulated the young king, poisoning his mind against his fiercely intelligent and undeniably ambitious sister wife. Cleopatra, around 18 at the time, found herself outmaneuvered and driven into exile in Syria. But this was no whimpering, defeated princess retreating to lick her wounds. This was a queen sharpening her formidable claws, diligently gathering her forces, and cannily waiting for the opportune moment to strike back. The necessity of eliminating rivals, even if they shared your blood and your bed, wasn't perceived as monstrous or psychopathic within this dynastic framework. It was a grim, pragmatic prerequisite for survival, a cold equation in the ruthless calculus of Ptolemaic rule. She understood, with a chilling clarity that belied her youth, that in the Ptolemaic Game of Thrones, you won decisively, or you died ignominiously and frequently. You had to ensure your closest relatives died first to secure your own fragile existence. The enduring, almost mythical image of Cleopatra often centers obsessively on her supposed unparalleled, otherworldly beauty, painting her as a siren of irresistible allure, capable of ensnaring the most powerful and battle-hardened men in the world with a mere languid glance. Yet, historical and archaeological evidence presents a far more complex and intriguing picture. Ancient literary sources, penned mostly by Romans who were often politically hostile towards her, are surprisingly mixed on the subject of her physical appearance. Plutarch, writing his Life of Antony over a century after her death but drawing on earlier, contemporaneous accounts, notably stated that her actual physical beauty was not in itself so remarkable that none could be compared with her, or that no one could see her without being struck by it. Instead, he emphasized the almost magical, irresistible charm of her presence, the captivating persuasiveness of her discourse, her stimulating intelligence, and a voice that was like an instrument of many strings, capable of modulating to any emotional key. Coins minted during her reign, which offer perhaps the most contemporary visual evidence, depict a woman with a strong, somewhat aquiline nose, a prominent, determined chin, full lips, and features that are more commanding and characterful than conventionally beautiful by modern, or even some ancient Roman standards. Her true, undeniable, and most potent weapon wasn't her face, but her formidable, highly cultivated intellect. Cleopatra was exceptionally well educated, a veritable scholar queen in an age that rarely valued and often actively discouraged profound female erudition. She was reportedly the first Ptolemaic ruler in the dynasty's nearly 300-year reign to bother learning the Egyptian language. This was not a mere academic pursuit. It was a shrewd and highly effective political move that would have endeared her to the native Egyptian population, who formed the vast majority of her subjects, and to the powerful conservative Egyptian priesthood, whose support was crucial for any pharaoh. Beyond Egyptian, she was reputed to speak a multitude of other languages fluently, including Greek, her mother tongue and the language of the court, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Parthian, Median, and possibly others, allowing her to converse directly and effectively with foreign ambassadors, merchants, and dignitaries without the often unreliable or politically motivated filter of translators. This linguistic prowess alone would have made her a diplomatic powerhouse, capable of nuanced negotiation and first-hand assessment of foreign intentions. Furthermore, she delved deeply into mathematics, philosophy, oratory, and astronomy, disciplines central to the Hellenistic intellectual tradition. Alexandria, her capital, was home to the Great Library and the Mouseion, the ancient world's premier center of learning, and Cleopatra was a keen patron of the arts and sciences, fostering an environment of intellectual inquiry. She was no mere figurehead, content to let ministers govern. She was a hands-on ruler, a brilliant negotiator, a charismatic public speaker, and a leader who possessed a profound understanding of the intricate mechanics of statecraft, fiscal policy, military strategy, and international relations. Her mind, sharpened by rigorous study and the harsh lessons of dynastic survival, not her fabled allure, was what truly captivated, impressed, and, at times, profoundly terrified those who encountered her. She could strategize with seasoned generals, debate intricate points with philosophers, manage complex economic affairs, and charm with an intelligence that was both dazzlingly brilliant and unnervingly disarming. This intellectual arsenal, combined with her regal bearing and profound self-assurance, would prove far more potent and enduring than any fleeting physical beauty in the dangerous, high-stakes games of power she was destined to play on the world stage. When Julius Caesar, the most powerful and ambitious man in Rome, fresh from his decisive victory over his rival Pompey the Great at Pharsalus, arrived in Alexandria in October of 48 BCE, Egypt was a kingdom teetering on the brink of full-blown civil war, and Cleopatra was a desperate outcast. She had been decisively ousted from power by the influential court faction, controlling her younger brother husband, Ptolemy IX, and was precariously holed up in the Syrian desert, leveraging her remaining connections and resources to raise a mercenary army to reclaim her rightful throne. Caesar hadn't initially come to Egypt to play kingmaker or to meddle directly in Ptolemaic family squabbles. He was relentlessly pursuing his defeated adversary, Pompey. However, Pompey, seeking asylum, was treacherously assassinated on the orders of Ptolemy IX's advisors as he landed on Egyptian shores, a disastrously miscalculated attempt to curry favor with the victorious Caesar. Instead, Caesar was reportedly disgusted by this cowardly act of treachery against a fellow Roman of high standing and used the ensuing chaos and power vacuum as an opportune moment to assert Roman influence, settle the dynastic dispute, and, not incidentally, collect on the massive outstanding debts owed to Rome by Cleopatra's late father, Ptolemy IX. Cleopatra, ever astute and opportunistic, immediately recognized this as her singular, precarious chance, a sliver of an opening in an otherwise seemingly impossible situation to regain her kingdom. The immense challenge, however, was how to reach Caesar, who was ensconced in the heavily fortified royal palace district, surrounded by her brother's formidable guards and hostile ministers. The story, famously recounted by Plutarch and other ancient historians, is that she had herself ingeniously smuggled past enemy lines by being tightly rolled up in a common carpet, or possibly a more practical bedsack or bale of linen, which was then carried by her loyal attendant, Apollodorus the Sicilian, and presented as a gift directly into Caesar's private chambers. Whether it was literally a carpet, a robust sack, or some other daring ruse, the act itself was one of breathtaking audacity and immense personal risk. It wasn't just a clever trick. It was a high-stakes, all-or-nothing gamble. She was placing her life, her dignity, and her entire future entirely in Caesar's hands, betting that her sheer boldness, the unexpected drama of her arrival, and the undeniable power of her personal appeal and intellect would win him over. And it worked spectacularly. Caesar, a man who profoundly appreciated audacity, intelligence, and strategic thinking, was reportedly both charmed and deeply impressed by her courage and resourcefulness. But this wasn't simply a case of an aging, world-weary general being instantly seduced by the exotic charms of a young, desperate queen. Cleopatra, once unrolled, presented a compelling and cogent case. She was the legitimate elder ruler, as per her father's will, unjustly wronged and exiled by her manipulated younger brother. More importantly, she could offer Caesar what he desperately needed: Egypt's vast, inexhaustible wealth to fund his legions and solidify his power in Rome, its abundant grain supplies to feed the ever-restless Roman populace, and a stable, friendly, and strategically vital client kingdom on Rome's vulnerable eastern flank. He, in turn, could offer her the unmatched might of his Roman legions to crush her rivals and secure her throne. It was a quintessential strategic alliance, born of mutual necessity, shared ambition, and a clear-eyed assessment of political realities. The ensuing Alexandrian War, a dangerous and desperate conflict, saw Caesar and Cleopatra besieged for months within the royal palace district, fighting for their very lives against Ptolemy III's numerically superior forces, who were inflamed by nationalistic sentiment. They ultimately prevailed. Ptolemy III drowned ignominiously in the Nile while attempting to flee, and Caesar decisively restored Cleopatra to the throne, this time with an even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as her purely nominal co-ruler and husband. Soon after, in 47 BCE, Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Ptolemy Caesar, universally nicknamed Caesarion, Little Caesar. This child was far more than a mere product of a passionate liaison. He was a profound and calculated political statement, a living, breathing bridge between the ancient majesty of Egypt and the rising power of Rome. A potential heir who carried the divine blood of the pharaohs and the genes of the most powerful man in the Roman world. With her throne now firmly secured by Caesar's formidable legions and her primary rival brother conveniently and permanently out of the picture, Cleopatra, accompanied by her young son Caesarion and her purely nominal co-ruler and even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, embarked on a significant journey to Rome in 46 BCE. She was officially there as a visiting client queen, an important ally of Rome and of Caesar personally, but her very presence in the heart of the Republic caused an absolute sensation, stirring a potent cocktail of fascination, resentment, and outright scandal among the Roman elite. She and her extensive retinue resided in Caesar's luxurious private villa across the Tiber River, an opulent estate that swiftly became a focal point of attention and political intrigue. Romans, deeply traditional, inherently suspicious of foreign monarchs, especially powerful, independent-minded queens from what they considered the decadent and effeminate East, were both captivated by her exoticism and horrified by her influence over Caesar. Cleopatra, for her part, did little to assuage their deeply ingrained concerns. She carried herself not as a grateful supplicant or a minor client ruler, but as a sovereign queen in her own right, accustomed to deference and possessed of an unshakable self-assurance that many Romans interpreted as regal arrogance. Stories, likely embellished by her detractors, circulated widely about her perceived haughtiness, her lavish lifestyle, her exotic and un-Roman retinue, and the extraordinary honors Caesar bestowed upon her. Most controversially, Caesar reportedly commissioned and placed a golden statue of Cleopatra, depicted in the guise of the goddess Isis, in the prestigious temple of Venus Genetrix, the mythical ancestress of his own Julian clan. This act, linking a foreign queen with Roman divinity and Caesar's lineage, was seen by many conservative Romans as deeply blasphemous and a clear sign of Caesar's burgeoning monarchical ambitions. For Cleopatra, however, this extended Roman interlude, lasting nearly 2 years, was an invaluable, immersive education in global power politics. She was at the very epicenter of the world's rapidly expanding superpower, afforded a unique, close-up vantage point from which to observe its complex and often brutal political machinery, its fiercely ambitious and frequently duplicitous senators, its volatile and easily manipulated urban populace, and its deep-seated, almost pathological, fear of kingship. She learned firsthand about Rome's immense strengths, its military organization, its legal structures, its engineering prowess, but also its critical vulnerabilities, its corrosive internal divisions, the dangerous personal ambitions that constantly threatened to tear the Republic apart, and the precariousness of even Caesar's seemingly unassailable position. She was undoubtedly playing a long, strategic game, perhaps envisioning a future where her son Caesarion, as Caesar's only known biological son, could inherit not just the throne of Egypt, but potentially a significant, even central role in Caesar's burgeoning global imperium. But this Roman chapter, with all its learning and political maneuvering, came to an abrupt, brutal, and bloody end on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Julius Caesar was savagely assassinated by a conspiracy of senators who feared his increasingly autocratic power and perceived monarchical aspirations. His shocking death plunged Rome into a new maelstrom of chaos, civil war, and retribution, and it placed Cleopatra in immediate mortal danger. Her powerful Roman patron and ally was gone, and many of Caesar's assassins, and even some of his erstwhile supporters, would have seen her and her son, Caesarion, as dangerous loose ends, potent symbols of Caesar's alleged tyranny. With characteristic decisiveness and a cool head, Cleopatra acted swiftly. There was no public display of a heartbroken lover overwhelmed by grief. This was a pragmatic queen thinking primarily of her own survival, the safety of her son, and the preservation of her kingdom. She quickly and discreetly departed from Rome with Caesarion, making a calculated retreat to the relative security of Alexandria. Back in Egypt, she moved rapidly to consolidate her power. Her co-ruler brother, the young Ptolemy XIV, conveniently died shortly after their return, reportedly poisoned on her direct orders. Whether this accusation was true or simply useful propaganda circulated by her enemies, his timely removal left Cleopatra as the sole, undisputed ruler of Egypt, with her son Caesarion, now formally designated as her co-ruler and heir. The audacious dream of a grand Roman-Egyptian alliance under the guiding hand of Julius Caesar was dead, shattered on the floor of the Roman Senate. But Cleopatra was very much alive, her intellect undimmed, her ambition unquenched, and her dangerous game for power and influence was far from over. The brutal assassination of Julius Caesar unleashed yet another devastating round of savage civil wars across the Roman world, as various factions and ambitious individuals vied to fill the enormous power vacuum he had left. The main players to eventually emerge from this bloody chaos were Caesar's shrewd 18-year-old adopted son and designated heir, Octavian, and Caesar's most experienced and charismatic general, Mark Antony. While these two formidable figures, along with the less influential Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, initially formed the Second Triumvirate, a formal three-man dictatorship, to systematically hunt down and eliminate Caesar's assassins. Their alliance was always deeply uneasy, a temporary truce born of necessity, masking profound underlying rivalries and an inevitable looming clash for ultimate sole power over the Roman state. Cleopatra, observing these tumultuous events with keen interest from the relative safety of Alexandria, understood with crystal clarity that she needed a new Roman protector, a new powerful partner in the high-stakes, ever-shifting game of international politics. Her kingdom's immense wealth, its strategic geographical location at the crossroads of continents, and its role as the breadbasket for Rome made neutrality an impossible, almost suicidal proposition. Egypt would always be either a coveted prize or a crucial pawn in the larger Roman power struggles. Her calculated choice for a new alliance fell squarely on Mark Antony. Antony, after the defeat of Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi, had become the dominant figure in the eastern Roman territories, the region most vital to Egypt's interests. In 41 BCE, Antony, then in Cilicia, modern-day Turkey, preparing for a major and much-needed military campaign against Parthia, Rome's great and persistent eastern rival, summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus. Officially, he was investigating reports and accusations that she had provided aid to Cassius, one of Caesar's assassins, before Philippi. More pragmatically, and perhaps more importantly, he desperately needed Egyptian resources, money, ships, grain, and other supplies, to fund and sustain his ambitious Parthian expedition. Cleopatra, however, a queen of immense pride and a consummate political strategist, was not about to appear before Antony as a mere supplicant or a frightened client ruler answering a summons. She understood the power of grand political theater, the importance of image, and the particular psychology of a man like Antony, who prided himself on his flamboyant style, his appreciation for opulence, and his lineage. He claimed descent from Hercules. Instead of rushing to his summons, she deliberately made him wait, building anticipation and subtly asserting her own status. Then, she orchestrated one of history's most legendary and theatrical entrances. She sailed up the Cydnus River to Tarsus, not in a utilitarian warship, but in a magnificent golden barge, adorned with purple sails, the color of royalty and immense expense, and propelled by silver oars that beat time to the enchanting music of flutes, pipes, and lyres. She herself was dressed in the guise of the goddess Aphrodite, Venus to the Romans, reclining languidly under a richly gilded canopy, fanned by young boys dressed as winged cupids. Her most beautiful female attendants were costumed as sea nymphs and graces, artfully arranged around her. The scent of exotic perfumes and incense wafted from the barge to the riverbanks, where enormous crowds of locals had gathered, utterly awestruck by the spectacle. Antony, who had been formally waiting in the marketplace to receive her, found himself ignominiously abandoned as the entire populace, including his own soldiers, flocked to the river to witness this astonishing apparition. He was then, in a subtle power shift, invited by her to dine aboard the magnificent barge, not the other way around. It was a masterful, breathtaking display of wealth, confidence, artistic sophistication, and carefully calculated allure, meticulously designed to impress Antony, assert her status as an independent and powerful sovereign, and allow her to negotiate from a position of perceived strength and mystique, not subservience or weakness. The historic meeting at Tarsus was the beginning of a complex and deeply intertwined personal and political relationship that would last for over a decade, produce 3 children, and ultimately reshape the destiny of the Roman world. While genuine affection, deep understanding, and passionate love undoubtedly developed between them over time, their initial bond was undeniably forged in the intense fires of shared political ambition, mutual strategic interest, and a clear recognition of what each could offer the other. Cleopatra offered Antony crucial access to Egypt's immense, almost inexhaustible riches, its formidable fleet, and its vital grain supplies, all absolutely essential for his military campaigns and his political standing in Rome. Antony, in turn, offered Cleopatra Roman military protection, the official confirmation and strengthening of her rule over Egypt, and a powerful, influential ally against the increasingly powerful and hostile Octavian in Rome. It was a partnership destined to shake the very foundations of the Roman Republic and set in motion a chain of events that would lead to its final, dramatic collapse. The powerful alliance forged between Cleopatra and Mark Antony was far more than a passionate romance or a simple, pragmatic political pact. It gradually, yet inexorably, evolved into an audacious, visionary, and ultimately perilous attempt to forge a new, dominant Hellenistic empire in the eastern Mediterranean, with the magnificent city of Alexandria as its glittering cosmopolitan capital, and their growing brood of children as its future dynastic rulers. This grand and increasingly overt ambition reached its most dramatic, provocative, and, from a Roman perspective, treasonous expression in the autumn of 34 BCE, with the elaborate public ceremony known as the Donations of Alexandria. Staged with all the pomp and grandeur of a traditional Roman triumphal procession, yet infused with distinctively Egyptian and Hellenistic royal symbolism, Antony and Cleopatra appeared before a massive crowd in the city's gymnasium, seated side by side on magnificent golden thrones, elevated on a silver dais. In this highly theatrical setting, Cleopatra was formally and publicly declared Queen of Kings, a title of supreme authority. Her eldest son, Caesarion, her child by Julius Caesar, then a teenager, was proclaimed King of Kings, and, most significantly, the true and legitimate son and heir of Julius Caesar, a direct, unmistakable, and deeply threatening challenge to Octavian's carefully constructed status as Caesar's adopted son and primary political successor. Following this, their own children together received vast and strategically important territories, many of which were either currently under Roman control or within Rome's sphere of influence. Their eldest son, Alexander Helios, then 6 years old, was robed in Median royal attire and named King of Armenia, Media, and the yet-to-be-conquered Parthian Empire. His twin sister, Cleopatra Selina II, was made ruler of Cyrenaica, eastern Libya, and Crete, and their youngest son, Ptolemy Philadelphus, then only 2, dressed in Macedonian royal garb, was granted Syria, Phoenicia, and most of Cilicia, southern Asia Minor. These were not merely symbolic, empty titles bestowed upon children. Antony was, in effect, publicly and unilaterally distributing vast swathes of Roman-controlled or allied lands in the east to his children with Cleopatra, carving out a new, independent dynastic sphere of influence that directly contravened Roman law and senatorial authority. For Cleopatra, this ceremony represented the near culmination of years of meticulous planning, shrewd diplomacy, and unwavering ambition. She was no longer merely Antony's consort or a client queen dependent on Roman favor. She was his active political partner, a co-architect of this grand, world-altering vision. She clearly saw an unprecedented opportunity to restore Egypt to its former imperial glory, to create a powerful Hellenistic empire that could not only rival but perhaps even surpass Rome in wealth and cultural influence, and, most importantly, to secure a magnificent and powerful future for her children. Caesarion, as Caesar's only biological son, represented an immensely potent dynastic claim that could, in theory, unite the venerable legacies of both pharaonic Egypt and Caesarian Rome under one powerful, charismatic royal house centered in Alexandria. This was an incredibly bold, even breathtakingly reckless move, a public throwing down of the gauntlet. The donations of Alexandria were interpreted in Rome exactly as Octavian intended, as an unambiguous public declaration of Antony's complete break with Roman tradition, his subservience to a foreign queen, and his treasonous dismemberment of Roman territory. In Rome, Antony's actions were skillfully portrayed by Octavian's propagandists as the ultimate betrayal. A once noble Roman general, utterly bewitched and corrupted by a foreign enchantress, shamefully giving away Roman lands and openly aspiring to establish himself as an Eastern monarch, a king in all but name. Cleopatra, in this carefully crafted narrative, was cast as the sinister, manipulative puppet master, pulling Antony's strings for her own insatiable, aggrandizing purposes. But from the perspective of Alexandria, the view was likely vastly different. It was a bold vision of a revitalized, culturally vibrant, and politically unified East, a new world order where Greek culture, Egyptian resources, and Ptolemaic dynastic legitimacy, backed by Roman military might personified by Antony, could create a stable, prosperous, and enduring empire, free from the constant, often corrupt, interference of the distant and increasingly dysfunctional Roman Senate. The dream was magnificent in its scope and ambition, but it irrevocably set Antony and Cleopatra on a collision course with a patient, calculating, and utterly ruthless Octavian, who was patiently waiting for the opportune moment to strike. While Antony and Cleopatra were busy dreaming of, and actively constructing, their grand Eastern Hellenistic empire, Octavian, back in Rome, was masterfully and relentlessly waging a different, yet equally crucial kind of war, an insidious and highly effective war of propaganda. He understood, with a chilling political astuteness that belied his youth, that to decisively defeat Mark Antony on the battlefield, he first had to utterly destroy his reputation, and even more critically, thoroughly demonize Cleopatra in the eyes of the Roman Senate, the Roman aristocracy, and most importantly, the Roman people. Octavian proved to be an absolute genius of political spin, launching one of history's most sophisticated, sustained, and ultimately successful smear campaigns. Cleopatra, in many ways, was the perfect, almost tailor-made target for such an assault. She was undeniably foreign, a queen from the exotic and often feared East. She was a ruling monarch in her own right, a queen, a title utterly abhorrent to deeply ingrained Roman republican sensibilities, which equated kingship with tyranny. And perhaps most damningly in the deeply patriarchal Roman society, she was a woman wielding immense, palpable political power alongside, and seemingly over, a prominent Roman general. Octavian and his network of skilled propagandists, writers, poets, orators, tirelessly painted her as a decadent, morally corrupt, power-hungry, and even sorcerous queen from the Orient. She was consistently portrayed as the Egyptian harlot, the serpent of the Nile, a monstrous queen who had used her unnatural seductive wiles and dark magic to ensnare the once noble Mark Antony, insidiously turning him from a celebrated Roman hero into an effeminate, un-Roman, and treasonous puppet, completely subservient to her will. Lurid and often entirely fabricated stories circulated widely in Rome about her supposedly lavish, debauched banquets. One apocryphal tale even had her dissolving a priceless pearl in vinegar and drinking it merely to win a bet about extravagance. Her alleged use of dark magic and exotic potions, and her insatiable, monstrous ambition to conquer Rome itself and rule it from Alexandria, with Antony as her mere consort. This carefully orchestrated propaganda deliberately and skillfully played on deep-seated Roman xenophobia, fear and hatred of foreigners, endemic misogyny, distrust and denigration of powerful women, and long-standing Roman fears of Eastern despotism and Oriental luxury corrupting Roman martial virtue. Antony, in this narrative, was depicted as having gone native, shamefully abandoning Roman customs, dress, and manly virtues for the decadent, luxurious lifestyle of an Eastern potentate, all under the bewitching and emasculating influence of his foreign queen. His public granting of Roman territories to his children with Cleopatra during the donations of Alexandria was relentlessly hammered home as the ultimate irrefutable act of treason. Octavian cleverly and consistently positioned himself not as an ambitious rival seeking sole power, but as the virtuous defender of Roman tradition, Roman values, Roman honor, and the integrity of the Roman state against the corrupting, existential threat posed by this dangerous foreign menace and her Roman collaborator. He even went so far as to publicly and illegally seize and read aloud in the Senate what he claimed was Antony's will. Whether genuine or a clever forgery, its contents were strategically damning. This document supposedly confirmed Antony's desire to be buried in Alexandria alongside Cleopatra, not in Rome, and formally recognized Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, as Caesar's true and legitimate heir. This revelation further inflamed Roman public opinion, making it appear that Antony intended to shift the very capital of the Roman world from Rome to Egypt. The propaganda was relentless, multifaceted, and brutally effective. It successfully transformed what was essentially another Roman civil war between ambitious warlords into a quasi-nationalistic, almost holy, crusade against a dangerous foreign enemy and her Roman lackey. When Octavian finally maneuvered the Senate into officially declaring war in late 32 BCE, it was strategically and shrewdly declared not against Mark Antony, which might have alienated some of Antony's remaining supporters in Rome, but directly and solely against Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. This masterstroke allowed Octavian to rally widespread Roman support, presenting himself as the champion of Rome against a foreign aggressor, and to avoid the politically unpalatable appearance of merely fighting another Roman rival for personal power. The potent and enduring image of Cleopatra as a dangerous, scheming, and morally bankrupt femme fatale, meticulously crafted by Octavian's sophisticated propaganda machine, would prove incredibly durable, deeply embedding itself in Western consciousness and largely overshadowing the complex reality of the intelligent, capable, and politically astute ruler for many centuries to come. This intense, prolonged, and vicious PR battle was as vital to Octavian's ultimate victory as any legion on the battlefield or any ship in his fleet. The escalating tensions, fueled by Octavian's relentless propaganda and Antony and Cleopatra's increasingly provocative assertions of independent power, finally culminated in one of the most decisive and historically significant naval battles in all of ancient history, the Battle of Actium. This momentous confrontation was fought on September 2nd, 31st BCE, in the Ionian Sea, off the western coast of Greece near the Roman colony of Actium. This was not merely a battle for naval supremacy or control of strategic sea lanes. It was, in essence, a battle for the very soul and future direction of the Roman world. Antony and Cleopatra had assembled a formidable combined fleet, numbering nearly 500 warships. Many of these were large, heavy, and powerful quinqueremes, and even larger polyremes, designed for ramming and boarding, and they were supported on land by some 70,000 highly experienced infantry and 12,000 cavalry. Octavian, whose naval forces were under the exceptionally brilliant and innovative command of Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, possessed a slightly smaller but arguably more agile and maneuverable fleet of around 400 ships. These were primarily the lighter, faster Liburnian galleys, which Agrippa had expertly trained to fight in more flexible formations. The strategic situation leading up to the battle was complex and increasingly dire for Antony and Cleopatra. Their combined fleet and army had been effectively blockaded by Agrippa's superior naval tactics in the Ambracian Gulf for several months. Their supply lines had been cut, leading to dwindling provisions, widespread outbreaks of disease, likely malaria, and rapidly declining morale among their troops. A breakout from the Gulf was becoming not just strategically advisable, but existentially essential. What transpired next, however, during the heat of the battle, remains one of the most fiercely debated, controversial, and pivotal moments of Cleopatra's life, and indeed, of ancient history. As the battle raged with ferocious intensity across a broad front, with ships crashing, ramming, and grappling, Cleopatra, commanding her own powerful squadron of 60 large Egyptian warships, which had been held in reserve, suddenly, and to many observers inexplicably, hoisted sails, an unusual maneuver in the midst of close-quarters naval combat, as sails made ships less maneuverable and vulnerable to fire, and broke through a gap in the center of the Roman line. She then fled the battle at speed, heading south towards Egypt. Mark Antony, aboard his flagship, witnessing her dramatic departure, disengaged his own vessel from the fierce fighting it was embroiled in, and with a small contingent of about 40 ships, inexplicably followed her, abandoning the vast majority of his fleet and army to their fate. Their shocking departure had an immediate and devastating impact on the morale and cohesion of their remaining forces. Many of their ship captains, feeling betrayed and leaderless, surrendered to Octavian's forces. Others were systematically sunk or captured by Agrippa's relentless pursuit. By nightfall, Antony and Cleopatra's once mighty fleet was shattered, and Octavian had won a crushing, comprehensive, and politically transformative victory. The precise reasons for Cleopatra's sudden withdrawal and Antony's subsequent seemingly impulsive decision to follow her are still subjects of intense historical debate. Was it a pre-planned strategic retreat, a desperate attempt to save a crucial portion of their fleet and, more importantly, their war treasury, which was reportedly on Cleopatra's flagship, to continue the war from the more defensible territory of Egypt, a plan which Antony was always meant to execute alongside her? Some historians argue this, suggesting the plan either went disastrously awry in the chaos of battle or was poorly communicated to their subordinate commanders. Or was it, as Octavian's propagandists gleefully proclaimed, a shameful act of cowardice? A queen losing her nerve in the heat of battle, with Antony so utterly besotted and enslaved by his passion, inexplicably and dishonorably abandoning his loyal men to follow his fleeing lover. This latter version, of course, perfectly suited Octavian's narrative. The truth is likely far more nuanced and may never be fully known. The battle may have already been turning decisively against them due to Agrippa's superior tactics and the deteriorating condition of Antony's crews, and a tactical retreat, however risky, might have seemed the only viable option to preserve some assets for a future fight. Regardless of the precise motive, the consequences of their departure from Actium were undeniably catastrophic. The battle effectively ended any realistic chance Antony and Cleopatra had of successfully challenging Octavian for control of the Roman world. Their formidable land forces in Greece, leaderless, demoralized, and cut off, surrendered to Octavian soon after. The path to Egypt now lay wide open for Octavian's legions, and the magnificent, audacious dream of a grand Eastern Hellenistic empire, co-ruled by Antony and Cleopatra, was irrevocably sinking beneath the blood-stained waves of the Ionian Sea. The devastating defeat at Actium was not just a military setback. It was a mortal blow to Antony and Cleopatra's ambitions, their credibility, and their very survival. They managed to escape the disaster with a fraction of their fleet and their treasury intact, making their way back to Alexandria. But the strategic and psychological noose was inexorably tightening. Octavian, ever methodical, patient, and relentless, spent the next year consolidating his newly won, almost absolute power across the Roman world and meticulously preparing for the final, inevitable invasion of Egypt. For Antony and Cleopatra, ensconced in Alexandria, it was a year marked by increasing desperation, dwindling international support as former allies flocked to the rising sun of Octavian, the bitter taste of impending doom, and frantic, often futile, attempts to rally their remaining forces and negotiate some form of settlement. As Octavian's legions, advancing from both east and west, approached the gates of Alexandria in the scorching summer of 30 BCE, Antony, a shadow of his former charismatic self, attempted a last-ditch, almost suicidal defense of the city. He managed to win a minor but spirited cavalry skirmish against Octavian's vanguard, an event that briefly, pathetically, lifted his spirits and led to a final, defiant feast. But this small victory was ephemeral. His forces were rapidly crumbling from within. His remaining fleet, stationed in Alexandria's harbor, and his last loyal cavalry units deserted en masse to Octavian without a fight. Broken by these ultimate betrayals, and perhaps already psychologically shattered by the weight of his failures, Antony fell into a profound despair. Ancient accounts, particularly Plutarch's, narrate that when a false report reached him, possibly spread deliberately by Cleopatra herself as a desperate measure, that she had taken her own life in her heavily fortified mausoleum, he resolved to die as well, believing all was lost. He commanded his loyal servant Eros to kill him, but Eros, unwilling or unable to strike his beloved master, turned the sword upon himself and died at Antony's feet. Shamed and inspired by this act of loyalty, Antony then fell on his own sword. The wound was grievous and undoubtedly mortal, but in a final cruel twist of fate, he did not die immediately. He lingered in agony, bleeding profusely, and was eventually carried, barely conscious, to the imposing mausoleum where Cleopatra, along with her two most trusted female attendants, Iris and Charmian, had barricaded herself with her most valuable treasures, intending it as her final refuge or funeral pyre. He died in her arms, a tragic end for a man who had once commanded legions and governed half the Roman world. With Antony gone, Cleopatra was utterly alone, a queen without an army, facing the cold, calculating, and victorious Octavian. Her primary concern now was almost certainly the fate of her children, especially her eldest son, Caesarion, who, as the biological son of Julius Caesar, posed a direct and intolerable dynastic threat to Octavian's carefully cultivated legitimacy as Caesar's sole heir. She entered into tense and complex negotiations with Octavian, who had by now taken the city of Alexandria with little resistance. What exactly she hoped to achieve from these desperate parleys remains unclear. Did she delude herself into believing she could charm or outmaneuver Octavian as she had his adoptive father Caesar nearly 2 decades earlier? Did she realistically hope to secure her kingdom, or at least a part of it, for her children, or even for herself as a compliant client ruler under Roman suzerainty? Or was she simply buying precious time, meticulously planning her own dignified exit from the world stage? Octavian, for his part, reportedly expressed a desire to take her alive. Parading the famously proud and once powerful Queen of Egypt in golden chains through the streets of Rome, as the star captive in his triumphal procession, would have been the ultimate public symbol of his complete victory, the final subjugation of the rebellious East, and the consolidation of his own supreme power. He treated her, at least initially, with a degree of outward courtesy, even allowing her to perform Antony's lavish funeral rites. But he kept her under extremely close guard, fully aware of her resourcefulness and her potential to become a martyr. Cleopatra, a woman of immense pride, regal bearing, and a profound sense of her own historical significance, would have found the prospect of such public humiliation, of being gawked at by the Roman mob, utterly unbearable. She faced a series of impossible, soul-crushing choices: ignominious submission and a life of gilded captivity, or finding a way to control her own destiny, even and especially in death. The siege and fall of Alexandria was not just the end of a protracted war. It was the definitive end of an era, the final, irreversible collapse of the 3-century-long Ptolemaic dynasty and the absorption of independent Egypt into the burgeoning Roman Empire. The traditional and undeniably dramatic account of Cleopatra's death is one of history's most iconic, poignant, and enduring scenes. The proud, unconquered queen, facing the unbearable prospect of being ignominiously paraded through the streets of Rome in Octavian's meticulously planned, triumphal procession, chooses a dignified, almost regal, self-inflicted death by allowing an asp, a venomous Egyptian cobra, to bite her. Plutarch, our primary and most detailed ancient source for this climactic event, vividly describes how she, after receiving Octavian's final, uncompromising terms, had the lethal asp smuggled to her, concealed in a basket of ripe figs or perhaps fragrant flowers, by a loyal countryman. After composing a final sealed letter to Octavian, reportedly requesting only that she be buried alongside her beloved Antony, she dismissed most of her attendants, bathed, and dressed in her finest royal robes. Then, lying upon a golden couch within her mausoleum, she applied the asp to her arm, or, some accounts suggest, her breast, dying swiftly and apparently peacefully, alongside her two most devoted female attendants, Iris and Charmian, who chose to follow their queen in death. When Octavian's guards, alerted by her letter and fearing the worst, finally burst into the sealed chamber, they found Cleopatra dead, looking as if she were merely asleep, with Iris already lifeless at her feet, and Charmian herself dying, struggling to adjust the queen's diadem, murmuring that it was a fitting end for a descendant of so many kings. It's an immensely powerful and deeply symbolic image of defiance, royal dignity, and a final, masterful act of controlling her own narrative in the face of utter defeat. However, the precise method of her demise, despite the vividness of Plutarch's account, has been subject to considerable modern debate, scrutiny, and scholarly speculation. While the asp story is thematically compelling and symbolically potent, the uraeus cobra was a sacred symbol of Egyptian royalty, divinity, and divine protection, often adorning the pharaoh's crown, and its bite was believed by some to lead to a relatively quick, tranquil, and almost sleep-like death, a form of euthanasia known as euthanasia. Some historians, classicists, and toxicologists raise practical questions. Could a single snake, or even two, reliably and quickly kill 3 adult women in such a confined space? Would a queen as intelligent and meticulous as Cleopatra risk a potentially painful, prolonged, or disfiguring death if the snake didn't bite effectively, or if its venom acted unpredictably? Alternative theories propose that she might have used a fast-acting and potent poison, perhaps a concoction of hemlock, aconite, and opium, which she could have ingested or had introduced via a sharp, hollow implement like a poisoned hairpin, a needle or a comb, scratching her skin. Some even speculate, though with less direct historical evidence, that Octavian, despite his publicly stated desire to capture her alive for his triumph, might have subtly assisted or even quietly orchestrated her end. Alive Cleopatra, even in chains, remained an immensely potent political symbol, a potential rallying point for resistance, and her son Caesarion, the living embodiment of Julius Caesar's legacy, was an undeniable and intolerable threat to Octavian's sole claim to power. A convenient, seemingly self-inflicted royal passing would solve many complex problems for Octavian, allowing him to appear outwardly merciful while efficiently eliminating a dangerous and charismatic figure. Indeed, Caesarion himself was ruthlessly hunted down and executed by Octavian's orders shortly after Cleopatra's death, with Octavian reportedly quoting a line from Homer, grimly remarking, "It is not good to have too many Caesars." Whatever the precise method of her death on that fateful day, likely August 10th or 12th, 30 BCE, it was undeniably a calculated, deliberate act of a queen determined to shape her own final chapter. She was 39 years old. She chose death over dishonor, thereby robbing Octavian of his ultimate prize, the public humiliation of his most formidable female adversary. Her final defiant act ensured that she would be remembered not as a broken captive, but as the last independent queen of an ancient and glorious Egypt, a monarch who dared to challenge the might of Rome, and who, even in her final desperate moments, sought to control her own indelible legend. The enduring enigma of the asp, whether fact or carefully crafted fiction, only adds another captivating layer to the mystique of a woman who continues to fascinate, inspire, and elude simple definition across the millennia. Cleopatra's extraordinary story, however, did not conclude with her tragic death in that Alexandrian mausoleum. In many profound and lasting ways, it was just the beginning of her complex and often contentious afterlife in history, art, and popular imagination. Octavian, soon to be granted the honorific title of Emperor Augustus by a grateful Roman Senate, successfully and formally annexed Egypt, transforming the ancient kingdom of the pharaohs into his personal Roman province, its vast, legendary wealth now flowing directly and exclusively into his imperial coffers, significantly bolstering his power and prestige. But while he effectively erased her independent kingdom from the political map of the world, he could not, despite his best efforts, entirely erase her potent memory or control her burgeoning legend. Instead, her multifaceted legacy began to be meticulously shaped, reshaped, and often deliberately distorted by those who came after her, frequently in ways that served their own contemporary political, moral, or artistic agendas. The Romans, particularly under the astute and image-conscious Augustus and his successors, continued to perpetuate and amplify the carefully crafted image of her as the dangerous foreign seductress, the decadent Eastern queen whose insatiable ambition and corrupting influence had threatened the very fabric of Roman society. She became a convenient, almost archetypal, foil to highlight supposed Roman virtues like gravitas, discipline, and masculine strength, and to underscore the wisdom and necessity of Augustus's firm, stabilizing rule. Yet, even within these generally hostile Roman accounts, a certain grudging, almost involuntary respect for her formidable intelligence, her unwavering courage, and her undeniable regal charisma often peeked through the layers of official condemnation. Over the ensuing centuries, Cleopatra has been endlessly reinterpreted and reimagined by successive generations. William Shakespeare, in his magnificent tragedy Antony and Cleopatra, immortalized her not as a simple villainess, but as a figure of immense, consuming passion, profound psychological complexity, and ultimately tragic grandeur. a woman of infinite variety, whom age cannot wither nor custom stale. Artists and sculptors throughout the Renaissance, Baroque, and later periods depicted her, often anachronistically and with considerable artistic license, according to the prevailing beauty standards, exotic fantasies, and moral preoccupations of their own distinct eras. Hollywood, of course, with its insatiable appetite for epic spectacle and romantic drama, seized upon her compelling story with characteristic gusto, frequently emphasizing the torrid romances and exotic splendor, from Theda Bara's portrayal as a silent film vamp in 1917 to Claudette Colbert's Art Deco elegance in Cecil B. DeMille's 1934 version, and most famously, Elizabeth Taylor's iconic, budget-busting, and historically tumultuous portrayal in the 1963 epic. More recently, there has been intense, often heated, debate and public controversy surrounding Cleopatra's ethnicity and race. While historical consensus among classicists confirms she was of Macedonian Greek descent, as were all the Ptolemies, ruling over a diverse, multicultural Egyptian population that included Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Nubians, and others, some modern groups and commentators have sought to claim her as a black African queen, while others staunchly defend her exclusively European heritage. This ongoing debate often says far more about contemporary identity politics, post-colonial discourses, and modern racial consciousness than it does about the historical Cleopatra herself, for whom such sharply defined racial categories would have been largely alien and anachronistic. Her true, enduring legacy, however, lies not primarily in her debated beauty, her contested ethnicity, or even solely in her famed, historically significant romances with two of Rome's most powerful men. It resides, most profoundly, in her extraordinary, undeniable abilities as a ruler, a political strategist, and a cultural icon. She was a brilliant, multilingual diplomat, a skilled negotiator, a dedicated patron of learning and the arts during a flourishing period in Alexandria, and a monarch who, through sheer force of will, intellect, and political acumen, managed to keep Egypt independent, prosperous, and influential for over 2 tumultuous decades in an era of overwhelming and relentless Roman expansion. She commanded fleets, managed a complex economy, navigated the treacherous, shifting currents of both international and deadly dynastic politics with remarkable skill, courage, and resilience. She dared to challenge the seemingly irresistible might of Rome, and for a significant period, with powerful Roman allies by her side, she almost succeeded in forging an alternative, Hellenistic-centered power bloc in the Eastern Mediterranean that could have fundamentally altered the course of Western civilization. Cleopatra was not merely a legendary femme fatale, as so much of her popular image suggests. She was, by any objective measure, one of history's most intelligent, resourceful, politically astute, and culturally significant female leaders. Her rich and complex story continues to captivate, inspire, and provoke intense discussion precisely because she defies easy categorization and simplistic moral judgments. A queen who ruled with brilliance and ruthlessness in a world overwhelmingly dominated by men, who loved fiercely and politically, fought tenaciously for her kingdom and her children, and ultimately chose her own dignified end, rather than submit to the ignominy of defeat. The profound shadow she cast upon history was far longer, more intricate, and more enduring than even the mighty Octavian could ever have imagined.